Brady Quinn, the former Notre Dame Fighting Irishman, joining us on the program. What did you get for being a finalist for the Heisman Trophy, Brady?
A trip to New York, and I got to sit there for a while and watch someone else get the reward. No, it was a good experience. You got to be around a lot of the other past greats in college football. It's obviously an honor just to be in consideration for it. And that's going to be the interesting part about this year in listening to your discussion is, there really should be probably 6 or 7 guys that go. They base it technically on the balloting or voting and that point system that they have and how many guys get first place, second place, third place votes. But the reality is it's hard to think that there's not going to be there's probably going to be hard to distinguish between who, should be the guy this year. I think if you're looking at the best quarterback play, that would be Bryce Young, in my opinion. I think he's been the best quarterback from wire to wire, even though last week's game he struggled mightily. However, he did come up when they needed it the most. Kenny Pickett's the most valuable to his team. I don't know that Pitt's anywhere close to playing an ACC championship game if he's not there. So you could probably make a case for him. I heard you talking about Jordan Davis, and that's probably the downside of playing that position, is as good as you can be as a defensive tackle. When you play on the interior of the D-line, it's everyone else around you who's more often than not going to be able to have success. And but you're still doing your job and you're dominant, but it just doesn't get appreciated the same way as Aiden Hutchinson, for example, who you could make the case is the best player in college football with the way he's played this year as a defensive end. And in their biggest moment, last week, he had his Heisman moment. As far as 3 sacks, 15 pressures, which is unheard of. I mean, you can make the case that he's as deserving of it as anyone.
Let me start with Brian Kelly. His departure. I know that you being a Notre Dame Fighting Irishman, how could he have done it differently, better, more tactfully?
He could have waited. He literally could have just waited a week. If LSU wanted Brian Kelly that bad, or let me put it this way, if Coach Kelly wanted to leave Notre Dame, the most tactful way he could have done it is say to LSU, look, I want to come there. You want me. Let's just push this thing off a week, because if we have a chance to win and it works out this weekend where they're actually in the college football playoff, I want to go finish this job and try to coach this team to a national championship. And you should want that, because you should want me to do the same thing if I'm in that position at LSU. And the reason why I say that is in part for the players, the coaches, everything that he was able to accomplish during his time at Notre Dame. That's just the proper way to do it. And also, though, for LSU, because he's already done this before to Cincinnati. He built them up, got them to a New Year's Six game, and then left before that bowl game. And then now he's become the all-time winningest head coach in Notre Dame and left again at a time where you're going, you could have just waited a week to see if they're playing for it. And if the team was playing for a New Year's Six and they don't make it in, so be it. No one's going to hold it against you. But now I kind of warn LSU fans, he's poked around at wanting to coach in the NFL at some point. What would exclude him from having a couple great seasons at LSU, which, they'll probably have some, have success. And then he starts wanting to leave to go take an NFL job. I mean, the timing's a little different because of the seasons, but that's where I just say if he just would have waited a week, I don't know that anyone would be upset about him wanting to leave for $95 million and where he feels like he's got a better chance of winning a national championship. That's his own prerogative. But the timing at which he did it, and then the way things become public with him telling that team, hey, I think you're a top 4 team, and then turning around a day later and telling the LSU players why he's there and why he's not a Notre Dame, it all seems hypocritical. But probably nothing worse than the Southern accent that was displayed last night at the basketball game in Baton Rouge. That took the cake, though. I'm not sure you're ever coming back from that.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but Notre Dame made it official. Marcus Freeman is the new head coach, and we have exclusive audio of him taking over. And, he is embracing the culture at Notre Dame.
Brady, I just wanted to say it's a real pleasure and an honor to be made the head coach of the Fighting Irish.
See? I mean, it happened there in South Bend, and it happened to Brian Kelly, at LSU.
It's weird how it works out like that. You find yourself in that, that top position. You feel like you gotta assimilate and fit in and all that. But no, I mean, look, I'm happy for Marcus. I think he, not only he'll continually get better and better and better as a head coach. I mean, he continued to improve just as a defensive coordinator. The players love him. You see the energy around that place. He kept everything intact. I mean, look at it. How many coaches went with Brian Kelly to LSU? If that gives you kind of any indication of how they feel about Notre Dame, the rest of the coaches on that staff, the players in that locker room, and their opportunity moving forward, it kind of just goes to show you that, they feel differently than the head coach felt, obviously, leaving. So
yeah,
the reality is, they're hoping he'll be kind of like Mike Tomlin, who took over, who hadn't been a head coach before, but took over at Pittsburgh, was able to win a Super Bowl, it was able to really, have a ton of success since he's been there, especially relatively early. I think that's the hope there at Notre Dame and what you're looking at with Marcus Freeman.
Brady will be part of Fox on-site pregame show in Indianapolis on Saturday night. It's Iowa and Michigan in the Big Ten title game. Pregame show starts at 7 Eastern with kickoff at 8 Eastern. Watching last night with Taysom Hill and the Taysom Hill experiment. I said, you got to decide. You want to play him, then go all in as your quarterback. Like you want him to be Lamar Jackson, then let's try to make him Lamar Jackson. But what do you make of the Taysom Hill experiment?
Well, I think it's hard to make him Lamar Jackson if you've got 10 other guys who have to adapt to a completely different style of offense. I mean, I don't care if it was Drew Brees last year or Jameis Winston when he was starting this year. That's a different offense than what you're going to run with Taysom Hill if you want to make him that than what you're running with Jameis Winston or Drew Brees in the past. So that's more of the difficulty is, and that's why I think you see that kind of you need like an off season to really adapt and adjust to that and find the type of personnel that you need at the wide receiver, tight end positions to make it work. But I think at this point we kind of know what Taysom Hill is as a quarterback. I think we know what kind of offense they have to try to run in order to be successful. So that, I don't want to call it an experiment, or just whatever decision that Sean Payton's made at this point. I think the tough thing for them moving forward is deciding on, like, what is our quarterback situation? Did Jameis Winston show us enough? Do they want to turn it over to Ian Book, which would be what I would do right now, and see what he's capable of doing? You drafted him for a reason. You should probably know where you're at with every quarterback on this roster as you head into 2022, whether that's if you're looking for a veteran, to trade or who would be a free agent, or if you're looking in the draft again at one of these quarterbacks in the first round, you better have a good feel for what everyone's capable of doing and where you're at that position. So at this point, I think we've seen enough to kind of know what he is and what he's not, and I think he's more valuable to their team as that Swiss Army knife, as opposed to, playing quarterback around a group that's just not – I don't think the roster's built to play like that. I think they're more built for a pocket passer, a Drew Brees, a Jameis Winston.
If we did a redraft with Micah Parsons, so Trevor Lawrence, stop me where you would put Micah Parsons. Trevor Lawrence goes number 1. Zach Wilson goes number 2. Trey Lance goes...
Well, I think you'd already start there saying maybe Mac Jones goes number 2 if it's going to be another quarterback taken. But, yeah.
Okay, but where's Micah Parsons go? Would you take him, like if you're... Atlanta with Kyle Pitts. Bengals got a great player in Jamar Chase. Jalen Waddle has played well in Miami. Yeah. Penny Sewell in Detroit. J.C. Horn.
I'll put it this way. He was, if you're just looking at the overall prospects and taking out positions, he was without a doubt, a top 5 prospect. So if you're ranking it that way, based on his ability to play off the ball, on the ball, rush the pass, all that stuff, he's freakishly athletic. He was a top prospect. You would have looked at him as, could he help any team that he got drafted to and immediately have an impact, and eventually you could see him wearing a gold jacket someday? Yeah. And so you could probably have stopped at the Jets at 2 and said if they didn't have a huge need at quarterback, but they did. So you really can't go that direction there. And then as you proceed through the rest of the draft, San Francisco, could they have used him? Sure, but they wanted to go after Trey Lance because maybe they feel like he's more of the future. They didn't want to pass up on that. So we can go through the draft, but the reality is he was probably a top 4, top 3 prospect overall if you just took away all the positions and what he had put on tape and how he was going to test and how he's going to segue into the NFL.
Why do we put designations on players? Because Micah Parsons went from being a linebacker to we need you as an edge rusher, and you get paid as an edge rusher. You don't get paid as a linebacker. And
Right.
I think that's going to be interesting to watch is, how he's listed. But Micah Parsons is sort of a TJ Watt kind of player and, should be up there for Defensive Player of the Year because this is one of the worst defenses statistically in the history of the sport. And he, along with Diggs and Dan Quinn, have really made them presentable, at least, and at times formidable.
Well, you'd have to say it was a little bit of luck. I mean, he started playing off the edge like that because of injuries.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily where they were originally going to put him, and that's usually how this all works out, right? Like Tom Brady ended up in New England out of, luck. He got drafted in the 6th round. He's turned out to be the greatest player of all time. So that's a piece of it. I think how Dan Quinn uses him is a part of it, too. Understanding his background, he had played defensive end in the past. When you saw him rush the passer at Penn State, you understood he could be able to get pressures, he could get to the quarterback. So all those things kind of added up to his ability to do it, but you have to have a coaching staff that's willing to. That's going to be willing to look at his stature and size and say, can he still set the edge? Can he still play stout on that side, even though he's not your typical, 4-3 defensive end and what that body style looks like? So it's a little bit of luck. It's coaching. It's obviously the abilities of Micah Parsons, who can pick that sort of stuff up as a young player in this league, which probably is the most impressive thing. It's just, you talk about football IQ, a guy who can play off the ball like that, where he was probably originally designated to play, and now he plays on the ball, and he's able to do it flawlessly. I mean, it's not even like he's hit a rookie wall or you feel like he's had a bad game. Wire to wire, he's been phenomenal this entire season for them. So obviously you got to give him a ton of credit, too, to the way he's kind of devoted himself. And I know he didn't play last year at Penn State, so maybe that was part of it, too. He was preparing himself for understanding the NFL game as he was sitting out last year.
More likely to see a surprise, Michigan, Iowa, or Georgia, Alabama?
Well, if you're going to look at the betting lines, you would say Alabama because that's at least a closer spread. And I'd probably say Alabama, too, just because they've got a couple of absolute stars. I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Will Anderson as being in that conversation along with Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, Will Anderson's been a part of a defense that gets overshadowed by Georgia because Georgia's been so good. I mean, they remind me of like the 93 Florida State defense if we go back that far. But, I mean, they're second to Georgia in almost every category for the most part. He's been a big reason why. And so you could throw his name into that list of Heisman candidates. But they've got him on one side and they got Bryce Young on the other. And if there's like two guys who can really and truly impact the game, it's at that edge position and it's at the quarterback spot. And Bryce Young makes up for so many of their issues up front, whether schematically on their offensive line or just mismatches. And this will be a tough one for them. Every single week he makes some throws and plays that you just go, no one else is really doing this in college football. And he's only a freshman. So I think Georgia's the team that probably you would say in this championship weekend, of the teams that are in contention for the playoff, is the one that you might put on upset alert just because of the stars that they have on each side of the football at Bama.
Great to talk to you. Safe travels to Indy, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you, Brady.
Sounds good. Thanks.
It's Brady Quinn, Fox Sports College and NFL game analyst, and, of course, Fox Sports Radio co-host, Two Pros and a Cup of Joe.